Okay, we will now resume. The question is that Amendment 75 be agreed to, and members who cast their votes now. And the vote is now closed. Point of order, Stephanie Callaghan. Point of order, Stephanie Callaghan.
Presiding Officer, I would have voted no.
Thank you, Ms Callaghan. I'll make sure that vote is recorded. Point of order, Kenny Gibson. Can we have Mr Gibson's microphone, please?
Still not connected. Sorry, couldn't connect. I'd have voted no.
Thank you, Mr Gibson. I'll make sure that vote is recorded. Point of order, Emma Harper.
Either, Presiding Officer, I would have voted no.
Thank you, Ms Harper. I'll make sure that vote is recorded. And the result of the vote on Amendment 75 in the name of Miles Briggs is yes 48, no 68. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call Amendment 11 in the name of Stephen Kerr. Ready debated with Amendment 75. Stephen Kerr, to move or not move?
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 11 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. And the vote is now closed. Point of order, Kenneth Gibson.
Sorry, wouldn't let me connect, so I voted no.
Thank you, Mr Gibson. I'll make sure that is recorded. Point of order, Marie McNair.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. My vote wouldn't record. I would have voted no.
Thank you, Ms McNair. I'll make sure that is recorded. Point of order, Liz Smith. Can we have Ms Smith's microphone?
Thank you. I would have voted yes.
Thank you, Ms Smith. I'll make sure that is recorded. Point of order, Craig Hoy.
Sorry, Deputy Presiding Officer, my app froze. I would have voted yes.
Thank you, Mr Hoy. I'll make sure that is recorded. And the result of the vote on amendment number 11 in the name of Stephen Kerr is yes 48, no 68. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. Takes us to Group 3, student support, including students with support needs. Call Amendment 1 in the name of Jeremy Balfour, grouped with Amendments 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 and 9. Jeremy Balfour to move Amendment 1 and speak to all amendments in the group. Mr Balfour.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I also start by thanking the Minister for his constructive engagement, and particularly as I came to the party quite late in regard to these amendments. And these amendments come out of a number of discussions I had with charities, particularly disabled charities, who wanted to engage with this bill. Amendment 1 would place a clear duty on Scottish ministers and the Council to maintain funding for students with support needs by adding a new section 4A to the 2005 Act. The intention is simple: to make sure that the support these students rely on is properly funded and cannot be chipped away by inflation or shifting budget. It secures funding at no less than the real terms level of 25-26, giving vulnerable students protection from rising costs. It also asks ministers to set out clear criteria for who is eligible to support, as that students and institutions know exactly how decisions are being made. To keep the system transparent, the Council would publish an annual assessment showing the impact of function decisions, the level of unmet need and how support is being used. Before any regulations are introduced, ministers would have to consult with those who represent students with support needs, ensuring that lived experience informs the process. And by using the affirmative procedure, Parliament retains proper oversight. I believe this is a sensible and proportionate amendment that protects existing commitments, improves transparency and reflects this Parliament's long-standing commitment to fairness and inclusion. Backing it means ensuring the students with support needs are not left behind and that the system remains accountable and responsive. Amendment 3 would add a simple but important requirement to the consultation process set out in section 2E. It ensures that when decisions are being made about a body's functions, ministers must also consult with those who represent students with support needs. This strengthens the bill by making sure that the voices of students who often face the greatest barriers are not overlooked. It brings their lived experience directly into the decision-making process and helps ensure that any changes made are fair, inclusive and again properly informed. It is a modest addition, but one that improves the quality and legitimacy of the future consultations and helps safeguard the interests of students who rely on support. Amendment 4 would ensure that when ministers are consulting on matters relating to apprenticeships, we must also hear from those who represent apprentices and prospective apprentices with support needs. Again, I believe it strengthens the bill by making sure that the experience of disabled apprentices and others who require additional support are properly taken into account before decisions are made. Too often, these learners face barriers that are not always visible in headline data, and their perspectives can be missed unless they are explicitly included in the consultation process. This small, again, but important change helps ensure the future policy is shaped by the people who understand these challenges best, which will hopefully be more inclusive and better informed decisions. Amendment 5 in my name would ensure that when ministers are consulting under section 10, we must also include those who represent students with support needs. It's a straightforward but again an important addition that helps guarantee that the voices of students who often face the greatest barriers are not heard before decisions are taken for them or about them. By explicitly requiring the inclusion in the consultation process, the amendment strengthens the bill's commitments to fairness and ensures that policy is shaped with a proper understanding of the challenges that these students face. Again, it's an important change, but one that will improve the quality of decision-making and helps ensure the future arrangements are generally inclusive. Amendment 6 would require Scottish ministers to introduce regulations, ensure that anybody responsible for providing funding to support people with additional needs in further or higher education must report how the funding is being used. It creates a straightforward but important layer of transparency, allowing Parliament and the public to see whether the support is actually reaching the students it's meant to. It is intended to help by placing this duty in regulations subject to the affirmative procedure, again ensuring that Parliament can scrutinise it and approve it. Amendment 7 would require the Scottish ministers to publish guidance for post-16 education bodies on how to use funding effectively to support students with additional needs. It ensures that colleges, training providers and other bodies have clear expectations about this funding should be directed so that it generally benefits students. It's intended to help. Again, the amendment makes sure that the guidance covers how information about available support is communicated to students and prospective students, so that no one misses out simply because they've not heard of it or they didn't realise that it existed. Again, practical and constructive step which will help transparency, but more importantly, help those students that need that kind of support. Amendment 8. This amendment would require Scottish Ministers to commission an independent review of how funding for students with support needs is being used and how effective that funding is improving access, retention and outcome for disabled learners to further in higher education. It ensures that Parliament receives a robust and evidence-based assessment of whenever current arrangements are delivering what they are supposed to deliver and whether the support provided is generally helping students to enter education, stay on their courses and actually achieve positive results at the end. Once the review is completed, Ministers would be required to publish the findings and lay a report before this Parliament, ensuring again full transparency and allowing members to scrutinise the evidence. I hope this is seen as a constructive amendment that strengthens accountability, supports continuous improvement and helps that the funding for the support needs is being used in a way that truly benefits the students who rely on it. Finally, Amendment 9. This amendment would require Ministers to carry out a full review of student support funding within a year of the provision coming into force and to report the findings to Parliament. The review will look closely at how the system is supporting students with additional needs, how funding will be protected or improved as responsibilities move between different bodies, and what their quality impacts are both the current arrangements and the proposed changes. Once the review is complete, again, Ministers will be required to lay a report before this Parliament, again allowing members to scrutinise the evidence. I believe this is a sensible and constructive amendment that brings clarity to an area of undergoing sufficient change. It helps safeguard the interests of students who rely on support and ensures the Parliament has the information it needs to oversee future decisions as these things develop. I look forward to hearing what the Minister and others have to say, but I move these amendments in my name. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Balfour. I now call Paula King.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. And like Jeremy Balfour, I come late to the party in some ways, but I thank him for these amendments and for the intent behind them, because I do think it is important to recognise the importance and the vital element of providing support to those with additional needs, and that there's always a desire, I think, to try and do more in this regard. And I think that was recognised quite widely by stakeholders, in particular by those in the college sector who would point to the fact that many of our institutions are very focused on ensuring that they can widen access and that they can support young people in particular with an additional support need to be engaged in courses that are really important. Of course, we do recognise and know the challenges that exist in terms of funding, and I think that's why it's important that Jeremy Balfour has brought that to the fore with these amendments today, because I would say that broadly Scottish Labour is of course supportive of the intent behind the amendments, and that is why it was discussed as probing amendments at stage 2 as well. However, I do have some concerns about how the amendments are drafted, and the principle, I suppose, of putting something in primary legislation that then ties the hands of future parliaments and governments, and indeed the council that's being established by the wider piece of legislation today. I think there's a concern more broadly in terms of the requirement in Amendment 1 to maintain funding levels. So obviously I would recognise that that is an important ambition, and it's something that again would command, I think, a general support. But I would be keen to understand how he envisages primary legislation doing that and not tying the hands of future governments in terms of budgets, because, of course, there may be, for a variety of reasons, situations where colleges have to move funding around or have to look at where there might be reduced demand in any given year. And would it mean, for example, that money would then sit unspent because it couldn't be spent in a different budget line within an institution, which might actually be then detrimental to what we are all, I think, seeking to try and find agreement on this afternoon. So I think we would all agree, as I say, the need to provide an enhanced support for those with additional support needs, and I do applaud Jeremy Balfour's tenacity in pursuing the issue this afternoon. But I do have that general concern about legislating in this way might not be the correct way to go about it, and that of course we need to continue to work together to hold the government of the day to account for actions, but crucially I think it is about building the policy consensus rather than perhaps trying to legislate for something on the face of a bill. And I'll leave my comments there. I'm sure we'll hear more from the Minister and Mr Balfour in concluding.
Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I too am very grateful to Jeremy Balfour for bringing forward these amendments on this very important issue of supporting students with support needs. And it was really good to meet with him at the end of last week and have the discussion that we did. As I expressed then, I want to put on the record again today, I am of course very sympathetic to the intent behind these amendments and agree with their intent. Everyone should be enabled and supported to participate in post-school education, training or skills development. And I also want to make mention of the points he made about the importance of inclusion and of making sure that lived experience is involved in the formation of policy. Of course, we in the Government appreciate that that people with support needs and disabilities at present are currently less likely to be economically active, and we are constantly exploring what more government and its agencies might be able to do to change this. And I know that's a matter that Jeremy Balfour has been engaged in for many years as well. The Scottish Government is firmly committed to building a fairer Scotland in which people can access the support they need to fulfil their potential in post-school education and training. And therefore, I want to reassure Mr Balfour and other members that the matters put forward in his amendments are being considered or are best being considered administratively. And I'll say why now. To ensure that this happens, I can advise Parliament that, as Mr Balfour and I agreed at the end of last week, I will arrange a discussion involving Mr Balfour, charities and organisations representing disabled people, Scottish Government officials, SAS and the SFC before this Parliament is dissolved at the end of March, so that those further discussions can take place. And I know that Mr Balfour and I would welcome the involvement of any other members with an interest in this matter in that meeting. Turning to the amendments themselves, I will set out my rationale while I believe they are unnecessary and risk reducing flexibility or creating duplication of existing measures and legal duties, and are, as I say, best being considered administratively. Amendment 1 would require ministers to ensure that funding is provided to meet the needs of students, as has been set out. All of Scotland's colleges and universities are already under a statutory duty through the Equality Act 2010 to make reasonable adjustments so that disabled students, including those with long-term conditions, are not placed at a disadvantage. This is an enforceable legal obligation that exists independently of this bill. Creating an additional statutory duty in this bill would not change or strengthen this requirement and would duplicate protections that already exist. In terms of a funding obligation on ministers, that is really more properly a matter for the annual budget process and not for this bill. However, I acknowledge that there might be inconsistencies in how these duties are applied and to the extent that support is provided. That is something I would hope we can explore in the discussion that I've committed to holding to determine if we can improve how support is provided. Moving on, I understand that the intention behind Amendment 3 is to ensure the interests of students with support needs are taken into account before decisions that may significantly impact them are made. The bill already includes mandatory consultation requirements. Section 2E of the bill requires the fundable bodies to inform and consult organisations representing their students as a mandatory condition of funding. This is deliberately broad and already enables engagement with any organisation representing students with support needs. Similarly, Amendment 4 is unnecessary, given my own Amendment 31 in Group 8. Amendment 4 would require ministers to consult apprentices and persons who appear to represent their interests. Again, I consider that this is broad enough to include all kinds of apprentices, including those with support needs. Amendment 5 duplicates provision in Section 10 of the bill, which gives the SFC the power to issue statutory guidance to fundable bodies and for the SFC to consult any stakeholders it considers appropriate. This could include apprentices with support needs or organisations such as LEAD Scotland. Amendment 6 would require bodies that provide funding to people with support needs to report on that funding. Funding for support needs is already monitored and reported by SAS annually, and Amendment 6 therefore duplicates existing reporting mechanisms. Amendment 7 would require ministers to prepare and publish guidance on the effective use of funding for students with support needs. Guidance on Disabled Students Allowance, DSA, and Additional Support Needs for Learners Allowance, ASNLA, is already publicly available via the SAS and SFC. Again, Amendment 7 would therefore duplicate existing provision. And Amendments 8 and 9 would require reviews of funding provided to students with support needs. A consultation on support for part-time and disabled students was undertaken between June and October 2025. It captured views on both FE and HE, including distance learning. Responses are currently being independently analysed, with funding to be published this spring, and I will ensure this happens before the dissolution of Parliament. And I appreciate Pam Duncan-Glancy asked about that point earlier, so I hope my response there is early clarity on what she was expecting. The analysis of that consultation will inform future policy and funding considerations, introducing parallel statutory reviews as the amendments propose would duplicate work already in progress. I'm also conscious that Willie Rennie has lodged a more far-reaching review provision in Amendment 113, requiring reviews of the operation of the entire Act that we would consider to be far more preferable to Amendment 9, and which could include review of this funding. So Amendment 113 is a better option. All that considered, I thank Jeremy Balfour for bringing forward Group 3 and ensuring that this bill process considers the needs of this specific and important group of people. However, I hope I have articulated and demonstrated why the Government believes his amendments are not necessarily needed and provided him with sufficient reassurance on practical actions that I will undertake with him, and so that now he will not press his amendments. If he does, I would encourage members to vote against them for the reasons that I've set out. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Minister. I call Jeremy Balfour to wind up. Press to withdraw Amendment 1, Mr Balfour.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I thank both members for their contribution? I do, in regard to the comments made by Labour, would say actually it might not and sometimes be a bad thing to tie future governments. We don't know what future parliaments in future years will do. We know at least one member with a very obvious disability is not coming back next time. We don't know what future parliaments will look like. And future governments can always amend legislation if they feel strongly about it. So I'm not absolutely convinced sometimes that is the strongest argument. And I do think sometimes it is good to be able to put things down which would require a change in legislation so that the whole Parliament can think about it. Can I thank the Minister for, again, his constructive dialogue on Friday, and again thank him for the very public offer of the meeting with the disabled charities, colleagues and others. I do hope other members from other parties will attend that, because I think it will be an opportunity to be able to lay out some of the concerns and see in practical ways how they can be dealt with. In the light of the Minister's offer and in regard to his comments about it, and in particularly Mr Rennie's amendment, which will follow and hopefully will be approved by this Parliament later today, it is not my intention to move Amendment 1 and seek to withdraw the amendment, Deputy Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Mr Balfour. Mr Balfour seeks to withdraw Amendment 1. Does any member object? No members object. Therefore, Amendment 1 is withdrawn. Takes us to Group 4 on publication duties. I call Amendment 2 in the name of Jeremy Balfour. Group with Amendments 46 and 47. Jeremy Balfour to move Amendment 2 and speak to all amendments in the group. Mr Balfour.
The members will be pleased that this is my last amendment, and I will be a lot briefer than last time. However, I think it is an important amendment, as this would introduce a new requirement for anyone carrying out a consultation under the 2000 Act to publish a summary of the responses they receive, along with an explanation of how these responses have been taken into account. It builds greater transparency into the consultation process and helps ensure that those who take the time to contribute can see how their views have influenced, if at all, the final outcome. Importantly, the amendment includes a sensible safeguard, allowing a person conducting the consultation not to publish where doing so would be inappropriate. Overall, I think this is a straightforward and, again, proportionate measure that strengthens accountability and improves public confidence in decision-making. Ultimately, it ensures that consultations are not treated as a tick-box exercise, but are a meaningful part of the shaping of policy. And I move the Amendment 2 in my name. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call Ross Greer to speak to Amendment 46 and other amendments in the group. Mr Greer.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I was pleased at stage 2 that my section 6A was agreed to by the committee. This is a hobby horse of mine around the right of the public to have access to public data. So in this case, it places a duty on the SFC and any education body that receives funding from it to adopt a proactive approach to the publication of data that's considered appropriate for disclosure in the public domain. There's a huge amount of lost economic value in Scotland from the fact that vast amounts of public data is not routinely actually available to the public. Section 6A2 outlines that this is intended in essence to be the opposite of reactive publication. So the SFC would have to identify and publish information without the need for a specific request, like a freedom of information request or written questions by elected members. So Amendment 46 just refines this provision slightly to align it with the language of Section 12 of the 2005 Act on the SFC's funding powers and to make it clear that it applies to post-16 education bodies. Amendment 47 just adds a new subsection, 1A, into 6A, so the new duty only applies to information that relates to the activities for which the body receives funding from the SFC, whether that's funding for higher education, further education, apprenticeships, work-based learning or national training programmes. That's intended to make it proportionate and to not impose a blanket duty on those bodies, so it should be easier to operate in practice. For those reasons, I think both of these amendments are just tidying up and clarifying a principle that's already been accepted by the committee, and I hope Parliament would be agreeable to them.
Thank you. And I call the Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I again thank Jeremy Balfour for bringing forward Amendment 2. However, I'm afraid I cannot support it because the Scottish Government believes it is inadvisable to put publication requirements for consultation into primary legislation without strong reasons as to why it is specifically needed in those circumstances. There are many consultation requirements in the 2005 Act, and they are not just for the SFC and Scottish ministers. Colleges and higher education institutions are, in some cases, required to consult too, and in some places the SFC must consult only and directly with ministers. Furthermore, the SFC is also subject to a general consultation and collaboration requirement under Section 22 of the 2005 Act, which is an ongoing obligation and not limited to specific functions. This Amendment 2 creates a blanket requirement which could cut across the whole operation of the 2005 Act and result in an unnecessary burden on the organisations involved. It would also be out of step with most other statutory consultation requirements. However, moving on, I'm happy to support Ross Greer's Amendment 46 and 47, which improve the new Section 6A on proactive publication, as he has stated, which was passed at Stage 2. The amendments 46 and 47 bring forward sensible changes to that provision to ensure that the duty to proactively publish bites on the right institutions, fundable post-16 bodies, and that it applies only in respect of data which relates to the actual activities for which the body receives public funding. I hope members will also support Amendments 46 and 47 from Ross Greer, and I ask Jeremy Balfour not to press his Amendment 2 for the reasons I have set out. If he does, I encourage members to vote against it. Thank you.
Thank you. Calling Jeremy Balfour to wind up. Press to withdraw Amendment 2. Mr.
Nothing to add, Deputy Presiding Officer, and seek to withdraw Amendment 2 as well.
Jeremy Balfour seeking to withdraw Amendment 2. Does any member object? No member objects. Therefore, Amendment 2 is withdrawn. Takes us on to Group 5, minor and technical amendments. I call Amendment 12 in the name of the Minister. Group with amendments as shown in the groupings. Minister to move Amendment 12 and speak to all amendments in the group.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I move Amendment 12 and all of the amendments in Group 5. I seek to tidy up the legislation. They consist of minor and technical drafting adjustments to ensure the good operation of the legislation, and all of them, except Amendment 61, arise from changes made through non-government amendments accepted at Stage 2. For instance, Amendment 12 inserts the correct definitions from the 2005 Act into Section 2A of the bill, which were missing at Stage 2. Other amendments correct references to fundable bodies to make them more accurately refer to fundable post-16 education bodies. Amendment 61 tidies up a similar reference in new Section 12C on widening access, which was one of my Stage 2 amendments. There are no practical or policy changes resulting from any of the amendments in this group, and I urge members to support these amendments to ensure... I will, yes?
Paul O'Kane.
I am grateful to the Minister for taking an intervention, and I appreciate what he's saying about the technical nature of the amendments, but I wonder if he would just be able to put on the record a response to the concerns that were expressed by University Scotland on the amendments and definitions being used, particularly issues around conflict of interest, transparency and other matters not applying potentially to training providers, but only to colleges and universities. So I wonder if the Minister could just clarify if that was the intention and what consideration he's given to that point.
Minister.
Thank Paul O'Kane for raising these matters and to University Scotland for their engagement on these points. Just to be clear, the change to post-16 funding bodies is to be consistent with the rest of the 2005 Act, so the legislation marries up across the two pieces of law. And, of course, the post-16 education bodies are slightly different in that they have privileges and obligations in the 2005 Act that training providers do not. Criteria for training providers will be set out in regulations, and we can set criteria in those regulations. And also, when awarding contracts, there can be conditions within those contracts on, for example, fair work. So I hope that gives Parliament and University of Scotland the reassurance of why we're making the change on these matters, and there will be important considerations for training providers through both regulations in due course and also in contracts awarded.
Thank you. No other members have asked to speak. Minister, anything you wish to add by way of wind-up?
Just to emphasise, there are no practical or policy changes resulting from any of the amendments in this group, and I urge members to support these amendments to ensure that the bill functions effectively. Thank you.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 12 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Parliament is agreed. I call Amendment 13 in the name of the Minister. Already debated with Amendment 12. Minister to move formally.
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 13 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Parliament is agreed. Moves us to Group 6, Conditions of Funding in General. I call Amendment 14 in the name of the Minister. Group with Amendments 19 and 26. Minister to move Amendment 14 and speak to all amendments in the group.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. My amendments 14, 19 and 26 all make the same technical adjustments to new sections 9F, 9G and 9H of the 2005 Act, as inserted by the bill through non-government amendments accepted at Stage 2 to remove incorrect references to sections 12D and 12J of the 2005 Act. These changes simply correct references so that the 2005 Act is clearly drafted and functions properly. There is no practical difference to how the effect of the provisions will operate. Where conditions are attached to post-16 bodies by virtue of sections 9F, 9G and 9H, they will apply to all the operations of the post-16 education bodies, notwithstanding that those bodies may also be providing education and training under other aspects of the 2005 Act. I move Amendment 14 and ask members to support all of my amendments in this group.
Okay, again, no other members have asked to speak. Minister, anything to add by way of a wind-up?
No further comments, thanks.
Okay, the question is that Amendment 14 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? That is agreed. I call amendments 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27 and 28, all in the name of the Minister, all previously debated. I'd invite the Minister to move amendments 15 to 28 en bloc.
Moved en bloc. Thank you.
Thank you. Does any member object to a single question being put on amendments 15 to 28? There is no objection. Therefore, the question is that amendments 15 to 28 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Parliament is agreed. I call Amendment 3 in the name of Jeremy Balfour. Already debated with Amendment 1. Jeremy Balfour, to move or not move?
Not move.
That is not moved. It takes us to Group 7, Conditions of Funding. I call Amendment 29 in the name of the Minister, in a group on its own. Minister, to move and speak to Amendment 29.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Amendment 29 enables the Scottish Ministers to impose a condition on the SFC requiring that further and higher education bodies and with the SFC requiring the funding and higher education bodies that they fund to take action against gender-based violence in their institutions. Colleagues will know that this has been an issue that I have been engaged in for some years, and today we have a chance to make a meaningful difference. First and foremost, I want to pay tribute to the remarkable and powerful campaigning that Fiona Druitt and Emily Test have undertaken on this issue. I also want to thank Pam Gosal, MSP, for bringing forward an amendment on this issue at Stage 2. We have worked together on this Amendment 29 before Parliament. As I said at Stage 2, there is good work going on already across higher and further education institutions to address gender-based violence issues in campuses, and Amendment 29 is intended to build on this good work. I am grateful to both Mrs Druitt and to Pam Gosal for a valuable discussion on this amendment earlier this month, and also to Colleges Scotland and University Scotland for their constructive engagement with officials on this amendment and these matters. Our colleges and universities should be places where all students can live, study and socialise safe from harm and harassment. Also, staff, of course, should be able to work in an environment free from the risk of abuse and violence. This amendment can help deliver that for all. This provision requires post-16 education bodies to act to prevent gender-based violence against their students and staff, and to provide support for students and staff who are experiencing or who have experienced gender-based violence. Such bodies will also be required to report annually to the SFC on compliance with these new requirements, and the SFC will also be required to publish the requirements which it imposes on these bodies. Presiding Officer, gender-based violence is not defined here, but the SFC is required to provide guidance on this and on compliance with these new requirements in general. The SFC must also consult before issuing guidance. Taking this sort of collaborative approach is preferable to rushing to define gender-based violence on the face of this bill. It is a sensitive and complex term with competing definitions already in use by different organisations. To make a practical difference, we need to get the definition right in future legislation. Presiding Officer, colleges and universities must take every action within their power to reduce the risk of gender-based violence happening. We need to be consistent and cohesive in our approach. And today we have the opportunity to make meaningful progress on this. And so I hope all members can support this provision, and I move Amendment 29.
Thank you. Again, no other members have asked to speak. Minister. On the basis that the member has been name-checked through the Minister's contributions, I'm prepared to invite Pam Gosal to make a brief contribution at this stage. Pam Gosal.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I apologise for being late. I would like to thank the member for bringing forward this amendment, which is similar to one I tabled at Stage 2 of the bill. A couple of weeks ago, the Minister and I met with Fiona Druitt from Emily Test. Fiona's daughter, Emily, took her own life after suffering abuse from her partner who lived in the same University of Aberdeen halls as her. Fiona has been clear that had the university staff been better trained to identify and respond to the signs of abusive behaviour, there may have been an opportunity to intervene. While this amendment is not exactly what Fiona and I had hoped for, it does include some important and welcome elements. In particular, it makes clear that in order to receive public funding, higher and further education institutions must take action to prevent gender-based violence against students and staff and to stop those who are experiencing or having experienced it. For those reasons, I am happy to support this amendment.
Thank you. Minister, to wind up.
I just wind up by, again, paying tribute to Fiona Dre and Emily Test and also other organisations like Sex on Campus who have raised these issues for some years. And we've spoken about these issues as a Parliament through, for example, the 16 days of activism that we mark in various ways in this institution and seek to support those that we represent. There is a lot of good work going on campuses to tackle gender-based violence in our colleges and our universities, but there's still progress to make. This amendment will help in that regard, and I would urge all members to vote for it.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 29 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Parliament is agreed. Which takes us to Group 8, Scottish Apprenticeships and Work-Based Learning. I call Amendment 30 in the name of Brian Whittle. Grouped with amendments as shown in the groupings, I call Brian Whittle to move Amendment 30 and speak to all amendments in the group. In the absence of Mr Whittle from the Chamber, I'm going to have to call Miles Briggs to speak to Amendment 76 and other amendments in the group. Mr Briggs.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. And I brought this following some debate, this set of amendments, following discussions at stage 2, which I brought forward a number of amendments to look towards a definition of a Scottish apprenticeship. And specifically, I stated during stage 2 of the bill that I felt the bill had missed an opportunity to provide improvements to the terms and conditions for apprentices, and also how there can be clear pathways to employment developed. And as the bill stands, there is no requirement for an apprentice to have a contract of employment or be paid rather than other forms of reward. There's no specific reference to development to demonstrate the competence in key areas either, and that's where I'd hoped government would work more with us to try to look towards some of these solutions. And from the outset of the bill, Scottish Conservatives have expressed our concern that the bill could jeopardise foundation apprenticeships by removing them from the apprenticeship family as they stand and reclassify them as yet undefined work-based learning courses. Taking formally assessed SQA work placements out and leaving a school-based skills for work type of course on their own would not achieve, I think, the same outcomes as foundation apprenticeships are. And every MSP will have met those who are undertaking foundation apprenticeships and see the huge opportunities and pathways into work which they are providing. So I have raised this privately and publicly with the Minister. I am concerned at the loss of foundation apprenticeships, and both myself and Brian Whittle, when he is speaking on his amendments, will want to highlight that and give Parliament the opportunity to retain foundation apprenticeships as part of the bill. Given what is still relatively vagueness in this legislation, there is no confidence that the bill will provide that certainty and sound footing necessary for the continuation of delivery of foundation apprenticeships, which are internationally recognised and a real Scottish success story. And I think government should have paused and considered what is essential to meet the ambitions of our Scottish education system to deliver on key government education priorities as well. And as we debate this final stage 3 of the bill, I do feel that the bill has lacked a focus on those frameworks to support and protect apprenticeships as part of this bill, and it has fallen short in this area. So I will listen to what the Minister has to say on whether or not I move these amendments, but for now I do press Amendment 76, 78, 80 and 83 in my name.
Thank you. I now call Willie Rennie to speak to Amendment 77 and other amendments in the group. Mr Rennie.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I've been working with University of Scotland on my 5 amendments in this grouping. University of Scotland are concerned that by adding in the terminology of frameworks into legislation, which previously wasn't in legislation, might embed the slow over-bureaucratic and unresponsive framework system that we currently have as to their experience. They're not against frameworks. They think there should be an opportunity to have frameworks, but it shouldn't be stipulated in law. I mean, ultimately, what they want to have is a system that's much more responsive and adapts to the modern employer needs. The way of developing new frameworks or changing existing frameworks for apprenticeships takes a very long time. And there are some institutions, higher education institutions, that have had to go down alternative routes rather than using the graduate apprenticeship in order to seize the opportunity that there is in the economy with that particular area of study and work-based learning. So my plea is with the Minister is to stick with the existing legislating framework and not have frameworks within that law to allow a greater flexibility within the system rather than embedding a potentially slow and unresponsive system as exists at present.
And I call the Minister to speak to Amendment 31 and other amendments in the group. Minister.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And a number of amendments in this group revisit what was lodged at stage 2. And so in speaking to them, I will group them where possible. Assuming that Brian Whittle's amendments 30 and 32 have been moved, they would seek to bring back Pam Duncan-Glancy's amendments in this space at stage 2. Amendment 30 seeks to add foundation apprenticeships in the definition of Scottish apprenticeships. As I explained at stage 2, the bill has separate provisions for work-based learning which were expanded at stage 2 to allow for the current arrangements for foundation apprenticeships to continue. So this bill, as drafted and amended at stage 2, will allow for the current arrangements for foundation apprenticeships to continue. I hope that's absolutely clear to Parliament. We can all agree that foundation apprenticeships are excellent for many of the people who are engaged with them, and we want good practice to continue and grow. However, we should also acknowledge that there are employers who do not like the term, the description, foundation apprenticeship, because, for example, school pupils are not in a contract of employment, and it can be perceived as devaluing apprenticeships by some. Again, this is notwithstanding the value of foundation apprenticeships for what they achieve for many, many people. This is one of the reasons why we have been very careful not to use the term, and I'll be very clear, the term foundation apprenticeships in the bill. I'll give way to Miles Briggs.
Miles Briggs.
I thank the Minister for giving way, and throughout the conversations we've had, I've found the point he makes problematic, and I don't think there's, from speaking to the industry, speaking to young people in the foundation apprenticeships, I don't think there is that stigma. And my concern has been the OECD 2024 report, Innovation in Career Pathways across 5 countries, that identified foundation apprenticeships as a critical entry point to a wider apprenticeship network. The government will be taking that away. And so would the Minister agree with me that it is problematic and concerning that that report was not used in the formulation of this bill?
Minister.
And just be absolutely clear again, there's nothing in this bill that takes away the provision of foundation apprenticeships as they are right now. The terminology will change to work-based learning. That's it. What is delivered by foundation apprenticeships now will be able to continue to be delivered should this bill be passed and implemented. I just want to be absolutely clear about that. If Daniel Johnson wants me to be clearer, I'd be happy to give in to
Daniel Johnson.
I'm grateful to the Minister for giving me. I'm actually going to try to be helpful. I think one of the interesting points from Withers was actually the need for consistent terminology about different levels of learning. And I'd just be interested in how the government seeks to bring this. In my view, a higher should be called a higher, whether that's vocational, technical or academic. Is that part of the government's thinking about actually trying to make sure that we encourage a parity of esteem by having consistent understandings about levels of attainment, regardless of the mode of learning? I'd just be interested in the government's view.
Minister.
Yeah, Daniel Johnson raises very important points, and of course a determination to achieve greater parity of esteem is at the heart of this process and was at the heart of the Withers report. So I'm grateful to him for emphasising those points on the record. If I may move on, Amendment 40 from Brian Whittle also appears to exclude apprenticeships from the definition of work-based learning entirely, which is unfortunately inconsistent with the fundamental aims of the bill. Moving on to Willie Rennie's Amendment 84, and I'm grateful to the exchange that the comments today and the exchanges that we've had in meetings in recent weeks on this point. Amendment 84 would change the definition of work-based learning to align it to industry capabilities and skills. Work-based learning, as defined in the bill, is not limited to traditional industry sectors. It can also be aligned to a wide range of public sector occupations and pathways. The Scottish Ministers will be able to set out further in regulations the requirements of and activities that will constitute work-based learning. This, in my view, is a better place for specification, as it will allow further change in the future and will allow us to engage and consult on what should be set out there. Miles Briggs's Amendment 76 proposes that a Scottish apprenticeship must involve a paid contract of employment and that the apprentice must receive no less than the minimum wage for apprentices. In practice, almost all apprentices will have a contract of employment. The bill already requires apprentices to work for reward, and whether a contract provides adequate pay and conditions for periods of learning will depend on its specific terms. As I indicated at stage 2 in response to very similar amendments, we would expect that the vast majority of apprentices will be under a contract of employment. So the bill includes a carefully framed definition that does not exclude the range of possible arrangements that would otherwise come within an apprenticeship. We do not want to limit future innovation, for example, to enable shared apprenticeships with multiple small employers. We must also reiterate that apprentices are given the full protections of an employee in terms of the Employment Rights Act. The minimum wage for apprentices is set by the UK Government, and that already does and will continue to apply to Scottish apprentices. Amendment 76 is not only unnecessary, but could potentially be limiting, and therefore I cannot support it. Amendments 77, 79 and 81 seek to remove the requirement for Scottish apprenticeship frameworks. Now, I acknowledge that there is frustration, especially among universities, with the pace of delivery of new graduate apprenticeships. I have appreciated discussions with University Scotland and others on this issue in recent weeks. These are issues which are already being worked on to fix, and were being so before the bill was taken forward to this juncture and before the bill comes into force. But the bill will further assist with it. The existence of frameworks is not of itself the problem. The process of developing graduate frameworks does, though, need to be much more efficient. Frameworks should also be shorter and simpler. The bill gives any person the power to request a framework to be prepared, and ministers have the power to set out in regulations the process to be followed by the SFC in response. Therefore, we could, for example, require a request to the SFC to be responded to within a certain time frame. Therefore, that would speed things up. So I cannot support these amendments because frameworks are in themselves fundamental to the operation of apprenticeships in Scotland. They can define the competency and professional standards expected of those delivering, assessing, verifying and assuring the quality of apprenticeship programmes. Frameworks also set out the role of employers and industry and specify the qualifications required for each apprenticeship type, supporting transparency and, crucially, quality of delivery. Removing the frameworks would place their development and quality assurance outside the statutory protections provided by legislation and could result in an unhelpful free-for-all. Therefore, Presiding Officer, we need to be able to trust that apprentices across the same discipline and different employers or even sectors are all broadly working to the same standards. So we do need to take action on frameworks, but frameworks themselves are important.
Willie Rennie?
Sure.
So if it's not in the current legislative arrangement, why is it necessary to do it now? What will actually change? What's been prevented from happening before that will be enabled now with it being in the legislation?
Minister.
As I said, what the bill does is, one, gives any person the power to request a framework to be prepared, so that is a change, and then ministers the power to set out in regulations the process to be followed by the SFC in response. So it's that ability to give the SFC a stronger direction on what needs to be done, which the bill will help enable. Moving on, Amendments 78, 80 and 92 would shift the definition of a Scottish apprenticeship from a focus on agreed training to a focus on the attainment of competence. They would require apprentices to achieve competency through a combination of training and workplace demonstration. As set out in the relevant framework, this is not workable. The definition of a Scottish apprenticeship must be based on the work undertaken, the training provided and the agreement between the parties, and cannot be defined by whether an individual achieves a particular outcome. Stephen Kerr's Amendment 83 revisits his Stage 2 amendment, which sought to put colleges and local authorities ahead of private training providers in terms of delivering training of apprentices to meet the requirements set out in apprenticeship frameworks. Amendment 83 at least enables the mixed economy of public and private provision to continue. However, the relevant requirements of an apprenticeship are not expected to be prepared with a view to who would provide the training, but rather the required standards of qualifications to be achieved and types of amounts of unnecessary training. Turning to my own Amendment 31 and Ross Greer's Amendments 34 and 30... Sorry, I've moved on, Mr Kerr, to Ross Greer's, but I'll be listening carefully later. So Ross Greer's Amendment 31 and my own Amendment 31 and Ross Greer's Amendments 34 and 36, together with Amendment 60 in Group 12 under my name, these augment the lists of consultees across the bill. They ensure the inclusion of apprentices and their representatives and trade unions where appropriate. These amendments directly respond to the appeals made by various members at Stage 2. Finally, Ross Greer's Amendment 35 places a duty on the SFC to publish its reasons for amending or revoking an apprenticeship framework. Although this could have been achieved through regulations under Section 12F4, placing the requirement in primary legislation ensures even greater transparency, and I am pleased to support Ross Greer's helpful amendment. Presiding Officer, as mentioned, many of these amendments cover similar ground to Stage 2, and my arguments against these amendments remain the same. So I would hope that Brian Whittle does not press his amendments 30, 32 and 40, or Miles Briggs doesn't press them on his behalf if that's the case. And I also hope that Stephen Kerr does not press his amendments 37, 38 and 83. Similarly, I would ask Miles Briggs not to press his amendments 76, 78, 80 and 82, and also ask Willie Rennie not to press his amendments 77, 79, 81, 84 and 85. In all those cases, if the amendments are pressed, I would urge other members to vote against them, but I would also ask members to vote for my Amendment 31 and for Ross Greer's Amendments 34, 35 and 36.
Thank you, Minister. I now call Stephen Kerr to speak to Amendment 83 and other amendments in the group. Mr Kerr.
Well, I listened, obviously, to what the Minister said about my amendments, and I listened to what he had to say in response to Willie Rennie's intervention, and he described his aspiration for the preparation of frameworks for apprenticeships as a desire for efficiency. I actually think a better word would be effectiveness. When the word efficiency is used, I'm afraid it doesn't inspire me to believe that everyone that should be involved in any preparation of a framework would be involved. And that's what the motivation behind my amendment says. The truth is that apprenticeship frameworks only work if they are rooted in the real economy. They can't be designed in isolation and then imposed on the real economy. So Amendment 83, which the Minister addressed in his remarks, and I tried to intervene on him, it goes beyond the very broad and kind of non-specific general approach that he outlined as the preference of ministers. And I know that government ministers and government in general always like to have the maximum amount of broad and non-specific manoeuvrability. But 83 asks that the Council, the Scottish Funding Council, when preparing a framework, consider who is actually best to deliver it, whether that is a college, a local authority or a private provider, in order to be part of the preparation. You're not building a framework around the institutions or organisations that you ask to be involved in the preparation of a framework. You're involving the appropriate people in the preparation of the framework from the very beginning. And that to me sounds so obvious. And it matters because Scotland's labour market is not uniform. Capacity, expertise and employer relationships vary by sector and by place. And a one-size-fits-all assumption that about delivery risks frameworks that look neat on paper, that are, in the word of the Minister, efficient, but they don't actually work on the ground. They don't actually work in the real world. Now, Colleges Scotland support this amendment precisely because colleges already play a central role in apprenticeship delivery and design, but they also recognise that flexibility matters if we want frameworks to stay relevant and responsive. This amendment protects that flexibility, which the Minister alluded to, but avoids hard-wiring a system that becomes outdated as sectors evolve. Now, in respect to Amendments 37 and 38, they go on to deal with how frameworks are created in the first place. They require the Scottish Funding Council to work in conjunction with employers, industry representatives, managing agents and training providers when preparing, amending or revoking frameworks. In other words, they put those who actually employ apprentices and train them at the heart of the process. Now, this is not an abstract principle. This is not ideology. This is not some kind of grandiose theory. Employers are the ones who know where skill shortages are emerging, how technology is changing job roles, and what competence looks like in practice. And we already know from evidence to the committees of this Parliament and from the SPICE analysis that weak employer engagement is one of the reasons apprenticeship frameworks can lag behind labour market need. From my point of view, this is about economic realism. If we want apprenticeships to be a genuine alternative to the traditional university route, if we want real parity of esteem, there was a little bit of a mention about nomenclature, which I think is relevant, by the way, but if we want real parity of esteem, then they must lead to real jobs in growing sectors with progression and earning power. That becomes a compelling reason for apprenticeships to become a priority choice that people make. That's why I brought forward an amendment earlier about outcomes, because outcomes matter for the people involved, obviously, but they matter enormously for all of us who are part of the real-world economy. And certainly it should matter for government, because if we're talking about expanding the tax base in this country, and certainly the Conservatives want to talk about expanding the tax base, then you need to tool up the economy to allow it to grow. And all of this matters because if employers are not at the heart of it, if they're not consulted, or they are just consulted at the margins and are not embedded in the framework, then you undermine the very outcomes that I think we actually agree we would like to see across the board. And it also matters for productivity. Now, it's not just Scotland in the United Kingdom that has a productivity gap. The United Kingdom as a whole has a problem with productivity. But it's not going to be closed if we are the productivity gap's not going to be closed by qualifications that don't match what businesses need. Frameworks designed with employers, training providers and colleges together are far more likely to deliver skills that raise output, support innovation and help firms grow. I keep hoping the Minister might intervene to explain to me why what I'm saying is not entirely logical to him. I think it's logical that these amendments have a place on the face of this bill. I'm not suggesting at all that ministers step back from their responsibilities. I'm not diminishing the role of ministers, but there is a difference between strategic oversight and centralised control. These amendments strike that balance. They keep national coherence while grounding frameworks in evidence, demand, that's the real economy, and delivery capacity. That's why I put forward Amendment 83 in the first place. You have to have the means to deliver the apprenticeships. And taken together, Amendments 83, 37 and 38 make the system more responsive, more credible, more durable. They support apprenticeships as a serious route into skilled work, including higher and graduate or degree apprenticeships, and they strengthen the link between education, skills, industry and the outcome of real economic growth. And that is why I urge Parliament to support them.
Thank you, Mr Kerr. I now call on Ross Greer to speak to Amendment 34 and other amendments in the group. Mr Greer.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. As the Minister's mentioned, my Amendments 34 and 36 just add to the list of consultees in these provisions of the bill. Amendment 34 adds apprentices, representative bodies and trade unions to the list of required consultees for the preparation of the apprenticeship frameworks. Amendment 36 makes the same change for when a framework is being amended or revoked. I would hope that all members will support giving greater recognition to the voice of apprentices and trade unions in the system. And Amendment 35 is just a further slight tweak. Myself and the Minister had similar amendments at stage 2, but I agreed to support his amendment at that point on the proviso that we would be able to come back and add this further tweak at stage 3, which simply requires the SFC to publish its reasons for amending or revoking an apprenticeship framework when they take those actions. So it provides a bit more transparency and allows us to understand their rationale for taking whichever course of action it is they've chosen to do. I'm pleased to have the Minister's support for these amendments, and I hope that the rest of the Chamber will agree.
Thank you, Mr Greer. I now call Brian Whittle to speak to Amendment 30 and other amendments in the group. Mr Whittle.
Thank you. Apologies to you, Presiding Officer, and to the Chamber for missing my start. There was 3 groups were swiftly going through when I went for a comfort break, so I do apologise to the Chamber. And I find myself in the position of speaking to my amendments after the Minister has replied to my amendments, which is quite a novel thing to happen. But I think my amendments were brought forward here, having spoken to many of the councils, having spoken to the Association of Directors of Education Scotland, having spoken to Solace, the membership network for public sector and local government professionals, and the employer-led Scottish Apprenticeship Advisory Board. And their fear is that without amendment, this bill risks foundation apprenticeships by removing them from the apprenticeship family, by reclassifying them as work-based learning courses, which have yet to be formally defined. You see, Presiding Officer, when a student disengages, we lose their potential. While modern apprenticeships are a fantastic goal for a 16-year-old who has lost his faith in the classroom, jumping straight into full-time employment can be a leap too far. They often lack the soft skills and resilience and confidence that experience can inspire. And I spoke to a teacher, and what we're talking about here is kids who have, or children, pupils who have disengaged from school. Of course, I'll give way.
Minister.
I thank Brian Whittle for taking the intervention, and I appreciate that we didn't have a chance to engage before stage 3 because of the late submission in terms of his amendments and no prior engagement. But I would, just for the record, I would have been very pleased to meet with him on these matters. And just in case it wasn't heard when I responded to Miles Briggs and others on these points, may I just make it absolutely clear again that what is delivered now under foundation apprenticeships can all be delivered under the new definition of work-based learning. All of it can. No change, no detriment. We're seeking to put apprenticeships on a statutory footing. This bill is about increasing both the parity of esteem and also the opportunities for apprenticeships to grow and develop. There is no diminishment of the offer of apprenticeships and on foundation apprenticeships. I just want to make that absolutely clear. And if any local authority wants to write to me, I will respond in detail. Some already have. There's foundation apprenticeships in concept will continue. It's just the name is not in the bill.
Brian Widow.
I thank the Minister for that intervention, and I was in the chamber to hear that. But unfortunately for the Minister, he's saying that the councils or any of these organisations can speak to you in this. Why haven't you spoken to them before? Why are they concerned at the renaming of this? Because they don't have any problem with the name whatsoever. Why would you change something that isn't broken?
Minister. I thank Brian Widow for taking the intervention again. Just for the record, I've engaged with COSLA on these issues and had other conversations. What foundation apprenticeships deliver, as I said in response to Miles Briggs earlier, what foundation apprenticeships deliver practically, most people, indeed all that I've engaged with, are supportive of. But there is some disagreement about the descriptor, about the name of foundation apprenticeships, and that is why we have not put it on the face of the bill, and that is why work-based learning as a definition is more appropriate and more advantageous, and that's why we are seeking to take forward the changes that we are.
Brian Widow.
Again, I say to the Minister, you have not yet formally defined what you mean by work-based learning.
Always through the
courses.
Chair, please.
Sorry, apologies. And I note also that the Scottish Government committed to undertake a review of foundation apprenticeships, yet this work has not begun. It seems short-sighted, at the very least, to legislate in a policy area without knowing the outcome of that review. I will take it.
Miles Briggs.
Taking this intervention, I think the debate needs to focus on actually what we're talking about in terms of what goes on in schools a lot of the time. I don't think we would say that is a work-based apprenticeship. But foundation apprenticeships are taking place in our schools. Often those who are furthest away from the education system are the ones accessing it. And I am concerned, and I've raised this with the Minister. I recently visited, and I know other MSPs from Edinburgh alongside me have been as well, to Liberton High School, who are, through Tigers, providing access to a foundation apprenticeship for key sector skills, construction skills. I'm concerned, and I'm not sure the government really understand, when they send a signal that it will be workplace-based, schools will not necessarily be captured, and local authorities who fund these programmes may decide not to fund them in the future, taking away that opportunity. I've tried to make that case several times to ministers, but it doesn't really seem to have been heard. What guarantee, therefore, will be given, and the member, I'm sure, will want to also support this, that we will not lose these in translation as part of this bill?
Brian Widow.
Thank Miles Briggs for that intervention, and I have very similar concerns to that, because when I was speaking to, I'll just get this, but if I could just answer the previous intervention. The school that I was speaking to before, we were talking about some children who, in their time of through primary school and into secondary school, had approximately a total of about 1 year in total in school, and they were third generation, and when they were lost to the education system, and the teachers were able to deliver a foundation apprenticeship that brought them back into the fold, back into education and on to positive destinations. And what do we mean by a positive destination, Presiding Officer? How do we define that quality job? And if you ask everyone in this chamber, I'm sure you'll give a different answer. Now, I wanted to use a case study, if I could, Minister. I'm not one for stats, but I was speaking with Aberdeenshire Council, and they deliver foundation apprenticeships and sustained positive destinations into employment, higher education and modern apprenticeships to a level of 10% higher for those in foundation apprenticeships compared to the national average. There's an increased average in attainment of 61% for all school leavers who completed a foundation apprenticeship. And is that not what we're trying to achieve here, Minister? And there's no lack of want from the industry, despite what you say. 96% of employers would be willing to host a foundation apprenticeship. Again, 96%. Most importantly, 93% of pupils rated their foundation apprenticeship as being good, excellent, and 60% of foundation apprenticeships said completing a foundation apprenticeship would encourage them to stay on at school, re-engaging them as students. 82% said that learning in a foundation apprenticeship is more enjoyable than learning in a Nat 4 and Nat 5. And this is why we need to ensure there are multiple pathways for students to reach their positive destinations. We cannot afford to lose foundation apprenticeships, a valuable pathway, because this bill does not describe it on its face. I'll take an intervention from the Minister.
I'm grateful to Brian Whittle for taking the intervention, and just to reiterate again, the concept of foundation apprenticeships and what it delivers is not affected by this bill. I feel like I need to repeat this because there are statements being made that are insinuating that foundation apprenticeships
Mr Briggs,
will not
the Minister is intervening on Mr Whittle.
Will not continue. And I'm sure members would not want to inadvertently mislead Parliament. So I feel I should state that in the bill, as amended at stage 2, section 5, 2A and B, define work-based learning, and they also, to give reassurance again to Mr Briggs and Mr Whittle, articulate that work-based learning means education and training received by an individual in a working environment and, as amended at stage 2, or in an educational environment in which work-based activities are undertaken by the individual, which reassures exactly on the point that Mr Briggs raises, and on the, just for completeness, and on the basis of a work-based learning agreement. So I would encourage colleagues to look at section 5(2) of the bill as amended at stage 2, and I'm sure they will be reassured.
Brian Whittle.
I will reiterate again, I feel I'm repeating myself all the time. I'm going to say if 96% of employers are willing to host foundation apprenticeships again, that sounds like a success to me. And I say again, the reclassifying them as work-based learning courses, which have still yet to be defined. And I said again that the Government have committed to undertake a review of foundation apprenticeships and work that hasn't been done, and yet you're making those changes. These amendments, of course, I'll give way. Yeah.
Stephen Kerr.
Friend, agree with me that he's making an excellent point to illustrate why this bill is such an unsatisfactory piece of proposed legislation. Because there was a great opportunity for us to work across the chamber to deliver a refreshed landscape for post-school.
Mr Kerr, could you please address your remarks to the microphone so that the official
it's a funny shape of our chamber, isn't it? And I'll just speak forward, speak to him. Somebody commenting on my funny shape, but that's a different matter. The reality is that this bill was an opportunity. This bill was an opportunity, and this opportunity is being squandered because there are ideas, all kinds of ideas from across this chamber and outside of this Parliament that could have refreshed the post-school landscape, and we're missing this open goal.
Brian Whittle.
I thank my colleague for that intervention. And I do think that in this particular case, the Government is trying to make changes for change's sake. I don't know why we're trying to change something that is extremely successful. I want to see foundation apprenticeships increased. Everybody understands what a foundation apprenticeship is. I have not one person I have spoken to across all of these organisations has had any problem with calling it a foundation apprenticeship. Everybody understands what that means. And as I said before, this approach is supported by many of the councils I've spoken to, Association of Directors of Education in Scotland, Solace, the Membership for Network for Public Sector and Local Government Professionals, and the employer-led Scottish Apprenticeship Advisory Board. Why change something that isn't broken? And I move the amendments in my name, Presiding Officer.
Mr Whittle, can I ask you formally whether you intend to press or withdraw?
Press.
Thank you, Mr Whittle. So the question is that Amendment 30 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their vote now. The vote is now closed. Point of order, Kenneth Gibson.
I'm afraid for the third time this afternoon, it didn't work. I would have voted no.
Members. Mr Gibson, please resume your seat for a second. Members, excuse me, if members wish to make any point, they do it on their feet and not from a sedentary position. Thank you. Mr Gibson, could you repeat what you said?
On a point of order, I would have voted no, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Mr Gibson. Your vote will be recorded. Point of order, Michelle Thompson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. On a point of order, I was unable to connect. I would have voted no.
Thank you, Ms Thompson. Your vote will be recorded. Point of order, Jenny Gilruth.
Point of order, Presiding Officer. My vote didn't connect. I would have voted no.
Thank you, Ms Gilruth. Your vote will be recorded. Point of order, Ruth Maguire.
Presiding Officer, I would have voted no.
Thank you, Ms Maguire. Your vote will be recorded. Point of order, Douglas Ross.
I was in the chamber when the vote was called. A number of members ran in after the vote was called, presumably having a cup of tea watching this. Is there an obligation on you, Presiding Officer, to ensure that only those in the chamber at the time register their votes, so we don't all have to wait for those who are finishing their cup of tea to register their votes?
Members, what I would say to members, what I would say to Mr Ross, further to his contribution, is that my understanding is that members were indeed logged into the system. Thank you. Point of order, Kevin Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I'm glad to hear your ruling there. However, this afternoon, there have been folks who have been called to speak in debates who have not been in the chamber or who have come in seconds before. Surely that is a greater discourtesy to this place.
Mr Stewart, that is not a point of order. The member had apologised. Right, turning to the result of the vote. The result of the vote, amendment number 30, in the name of Brian Whittle, is yes, 45, no, 71. There were no abstentions, and the amendment is therefore not agreed. I call Amendment 76 in the name of Miles Briggs, already debated with Amendment 30. Miles Briggs, to move or not move?
Not moved.
Not moved. I call Amendment 77 in the name of Willie Rennie, already debated with Amendment 30. Willie Rennie, to move or not move?
Not moved.
Not moved. I call Amendment 78 in the name of Miles Briggs, already debated with Amendment 30. Miles Briggs, to move or not move?
Not moved.
Not moved. I call Amendment 79 in the name of Willie Rennie, already debated with Amendment 30. Willie Rennie, to move or not move?
Not moved.
Not moved. I call Amendment 31 in the name of the Minister, already debated with Amendment 30. Minister, to move formally?
Formally moved.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 31 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Are we all agreed? Yes. The Parliament is agreed, and therefore Amendment 31 is agreed to. I call Amendment 4 in the name of Jeremy Balfour, already debated with Amendment 1. Jeremy Balfour, to move or not move?
Not move.
Not moved. I call Amendment 80 in the name of Miles Briggs, already debated with Amendment 30. Miles Briggs, to move or not move?
Not moved.
Not moved. I call Amendment 81 in the name of Willie Rennie, already debated with Amendment 30. Willie Rennie, to move or not move?
Not moved.
Not moved. I call Amendment 32 in the name of Brian Whittle, already debated with Amendment 30. Brian Whittle, to move or not move?
Moved.
Moved. The question is that Amendment 32 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division, and members should cast their vote now. The vote is now closed. Point of order, Pauline McNeill.
Connect, Presiding Officer. I would have voted yes.
Thank you, Ms McNeill. Your vote will be recorded. Thank you. The result of the vote on amendment number 32 in the name of Brian Whittle is yes 45, no 70. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call amendment 82 in the name of Miles Briggs, already debated with amendment 30. Miles Briggs to move or not move?
Not moved.
Not moved. I call amendment 83 in the name of Stephen Kerr, already debated with amendment 30. Stephen Kerr to move or not move?
Moved.
Moved. The question is that amendment 83 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their vote now. The vote is now closed. The result of the vote on amendment number 83 in the name of Stephen Kerr is yes 47, no 71. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call amendment 34 in the name of Ross Greer, already debated with amendment 30. Ross Greer to move or not move?
Move.
Moved. The question is that amendment 34 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
Are we all agreed?
Yes.
The Parliament is agreed. And amendment 34 is therefore agreed to. I call amendment 35 in the name of Ross Greer, ready to debate with amendment 30. Ross Greer to move or not move?
Move.
Moved. The question is that amendment 35 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
The Parliament is agreed and amendment 35 is therefore agreed to. I call amendment 36 in the name of Ross Greer, ready to debate with amendment 30. Ross Greer to move or not move?
Moved.
Moved. The question is that amendment 36 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
The Parliament is agreed. Amendment 36 is therefore agreed to. I call amendment 37 in the name of Stephen Kerr, already debated with amendment 30. Stephen Kerr to move or not move?
Moved.
Moved. The question is that amendment 37 in the name of Stephen Kerr be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their vote now. The vote is now closed. Point of order, Megan Gallagher.
Yes.
Thank you, Ms Gallagher. Your vote will be recorded. The result of the vote on amendment number 37 in the name of Stephen Kerr is yes 46, no 71. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call amendment 38 in the name of Stephen Kerr, already debated with amendment 30. Stephen Kerr to move or not move?
Moved.
Moved. The question is therefore that amendment 38 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their vote now. The vote is now closed. Point of order, Megan Gallagher.
Again, Presiding Officer, my app wouldn't connect. I would have voted yes.
Thank you, Ms Gallagher. Your vote will be recorded. The result of the vote on amendment number 38 in the name of Stephen Kerr is yes 47, no 71. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I understood a minute ago that the Minister might wish to make a point of order.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. For the interests of the official report, in my last intervention to Brian Whittle, I stated that the bill as amended at stage 2 at section 5.2 had the definition of work-based learning. I wish to correct that to 5.3. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. That will be noted on the record. We now turn to Group 9 on funding for Scottish apprenticeships and work-based learning. I call Amendment 39 in the name of Stephen Kerr. Group with amendments 41, 42, 43, 44 and 86. And I call on Stephen Kerr to move Amendment 39 and to speak to all amendments of the group. Mr Kerr.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. So for me, this group of amendments actually goes to the heart of what this bill could actually mean for people. It's not about structures. This is about, well, we can debate governance, powers, frameworks all the day long, but the real test of legislation is whether it expands opportunity. So this, to me, is about the people that should be at the centre of this. It's about raising skill levels, and it's fundamentally about helping Scotland's economy grow and helping Scotland's people prosper. These amendments are about making sure that apprenticeships and work-based learning, as the Minister has defined it, do exactly that. So I will start at Amendment 39 because it sets the tone. It requires ministers, when funding the system, to seek to ensure that every 16 to 24-year-old who is not in full-time education or employment is offered access to a publicly funded apprenticeship or work-based learning opportunity. Now, Brian Whittle used a phrase that ministers, certainly representatives of the government party, like to use a lot, which is positive destinations. It's such a broad meaning that it's pretty much meaningless. And the reality is there are far too many 16 to 24-year-olds in our country for whom that phrase is actually almost has the sound of mockery about it. Yes.
Brian Whittle.
Very grateful to my colleague. Would you agree with me that some destinations are more positive than others? And we have to make sure that these routes are available to all our pupils. Stephen Kerr.
I do, because under the current definitions that government ministers like to use, and as I say the SNP like to parrot, is, you know, first of all, the duration of the tracking in terms of positive destinations is very limited, and such is the broad range. I mean, you can work for a couple of hours in a charity shop in a week, and that's considered a positive destination. Well, for someone who has ambition for Scotland and for the people of Scotland, that ought not to be seen as a positive destination. And therefore, that's why I bring forward this amendment, because it creates obligations. So this is not a guarantee of placement. It's not an entitlement without effort. It's a commitment to opportunity. And one of the driving influences in my politics, and I think the politics of many of my colleagues on this side of the chamber, is the concept of equality of opportunity. Equality of outcomes is quite a different matter, because ultimately people will rise to whatever level it is they aspire to rise to in terms of hard work and effort and all of the stuff that goes with that. But in terms of creating more equality of opportunity, I think that's what we are in business to do. That's exactly why we are Conservatives on this side of the chamber. And this amendment is a commitment to opportunity, because too many young people, and I don't see how other members would disagree with this, because it's a sad reality, too many young people fall into the gap between school and work. Too many young people disconnect very early on and never quite reconnect. And once that happens, the costs to the individual and to society rise quickly. This amendment is about keeping doors open and making sure that we have a system that reaches out rather than waits passively. Now, the SPICE analysis ahead of Stage 3 highlights long-standing concerns about disengagement among young people not in education, employment or training, and the uneven availability of apprenticeship opportunities across Scotland. So Amendment 39 addresses these issues, that problem, directly. Amendment 41, if the Chamber will forgive me, is one I want to dwell on for a moment, because it goes to something deeper than skills policy. It recognises that apprenticeships are not just for school leavers, because that can be a trap of our thinking. Modern working lives are not linear. Maybe some of us in this chamber had the opportunity before we entered politics to work in the same business, in the same sort of role, function for our careers. That is very uncommon in the modern economy. Modern working lives, as I say, are not linear. People retrain. They have to retrain. Industries decline. Technology reshapes jobs. We're in the midst of such a reshaping of our economy right now. On average, people will change careers multiple times over the course of their working life. And this amendment ensures that apprenticeship and work-based learning provision includes pathways for the unemployed, for people seeking to change their career, and those that are at risk of labour market exclusion. And that matters, and it should be on the face of the bill, because helping someone retrain is not just an economic intervention, it's about human dignity and about empowering people to have control over their lives. This is not about handouts, this is the hand up that I think we should all aspire to see as a common feature of our society, a society based on fairness, a society where we believe in equality of opportunity. It is about giving people the tools that they need to take responsibility for their own futures, rather than parking them on benefits and just hoping that things change. Work gives people structure, purpose, independence. A system that actively helps people reskill and re-enter employment is a system that believes in personal agency, not managed dependency. If someone wants to move from a declining sector into a growing one, the system should back that ambition. We should back that ambition. If someone has lost their job and wants to get back into productive work, we should be helping them do so, not writing off them as yesterday's workforce. Amendment 42 focuses on the front end of the pipeline. It requires the Scottish Funding Council to promote and support school-to-work pathways, including school-college partnerships, foundation apprenticeships that have been renamed, work-based learning in the senior phase. This is not new thinking. The evidence has been around for years where schools, colleges and employers work together. Transitions improve, dropout rates fall. But delivery has been inconsistent, too often dependent on local goodwill rather than a national expectation. And this amendment bakes those relationships into the system. And I've seen, as many of my fellow parliamentarians will have seen, where this works, how beautiful a thing it is to see young people, particularly young people, who have dropped out of school because of their disinterest for varieties of reasons, but who then have their imagination ignited by seeing what it is that's available to them, for example, in college. And that's why I went on at length in my intervention with Brian Whittle to talk about the opportunity that this bill was, to reimagine, to reshape the landscape for post-school journeys. We've missed that opportunity with this bill. However, it is reshaped by these amendments. Colleges of Scotland have been clear that colleges are central to those pathways and already provide wraparound support that improves completion and progression rates. And I would specifically like to call out the inspiring example that I have seen at Forth Valley College. This amendment strengthens that role and gives it permanence. Amendment 43 turns to graduate apprenticeships, which I strongly believe are one of the most underused assets in our skills system. I've already indicated a couple of times that I think the name often misleads people. You don't have to be a graduate to go on a graduate apprenticeship. The whole point is you're an undergraduate. One of the positive outcomes of this apprenticeship is you obtain a degree. And this Amendment 43 requires the Scottish Funding Council to take steps to expand both the range and the number of graduate or degree apprenticeship frameworks and to prioritise sectors experiencing skill shortages. If we had more time, we would, I think, agree across this chamber there are a number of key roles. Particularly, I would point to the health service, where this sort of apprenticeship would be most welcome. I give way to Pam Duncan-Glancy.
I thank the member for taking the intervention, and he's quite right to point out the issues around graduate support. And would the member agree with me that with the gap between the number of disabled people who are in graduate place jobs and the number of who are non-disabled growing, there is a need to do something specific for a group of disabled graduates who are in underemployment?
Stephen Kerr.
Underemployment. I'm delighted that Pam Duncan-Glancy intervened to make the point she's making, and specifically in relation to underemployment. Our economy suffers from underemployment. When the governing party of Scotland is boasting about people earning, that more people paying tax are earning less than £30,000 a year, in order to make a political point, I think we have a serious underemployment problem in our economy, in our country. And I agree with her. I think we should be, again, more imaginative in how we see the workforce, not write off whole demographics, whole groups of people in our society. Again, if we believe in equality of opportunity, that has to apply to people of all ranges of ability and disability. So these apprenticeships that I'm trying to enthuse about, which I hope is an enthusiasm shared by others, combine degree-level work, learning, with paid employment. They deliver high completion rates, strong employer satisfaction and excellent employment outcomes. And yet, as I say, uptake remains limited and patchy. This amendment pushes the system, as I think we should, to focus on where they matter most, sectors that underpin productivity and economic growth. Amendment 44, and I apologise, Presiding Officer, I am coming to a conclusion, but all of the amendments I think in this group are my amendments, and I'm trying to address them all to give members an opportunity to hear the rationale behind them and also to consider them openly, with an open mind, whether they support them. Amendment 44 is about accountability. It says, and this is important, that apprenticeship numbers should not fall year on year unless ministers come to Parliament to explain why and secure approval. Because we've topped out the number of apprenticeships we have in Scotland. Because of the nature of the centralised planned way that we're deciding how many apprentices there are. I mean, we on this side of the chamber have repeatedly made the case for a demand-led apprenticeship system, where employers who have these jobs, who have these roles, are given the support they need in order to be able to fulfil them, and give young people and people changing their careers and people that are underemployed and people that are unemployed the opportunity that should be theirs. I give way to Daniel Johnson.
Daniel Johnson.
I'm very grateful to the member for giving way. I actually wonder if one of the more fundamental points of this section is actually one of the risks of consolidating skills funding within tertiary education more broadly, is we lose the clear focus and line of sight we have on both numbers and actually most critically skills funding. And I believe this is a topic that will be covered off in further sections. But I wonder if actually loss of that clarity is an issue, and I wonder if the member might agree with me that that's one of the risks.
Stephen Kerr.
Absolutely agree with Daniel Johnson. This is a concern I've got, that by lumping apprenticeships into the Scottish Funding Council in the way that that's just fundamentally what this bill does, right? This is what the bill is fundamentally about, that we are going to lose sight of this. And that while we talk all the time in this Parliament, whenever we get the opportunity about parity of esteem. That's not how it's going to play out when it comes to money. And we know what pressure the higher education system is under in this country. We know what pressure the further education system in this country is under. And where does the squeeze come? That's what worries me, and that's why I'm introducing such an amendment, that you can't go backwards. I give way, yes. John Mason.
I thank the member for giving way. I mean, I do agree with him about the importance of apprenticeships, but we have an ageing population. We have fewer young people. So how can he put in legislation that there must be not a reduction in apprentices?
Stephen Kerr.
Well, I'm kind of disappointed because John Mason and I get along really well, I think. I'm really disappointed he's not listened to anything I've been saying. I had a whole amendment about the fact that this is not about an age-limited demographic. This is about people of all ages and at all stages of their careers. Apprentices, and I'll break it gently to my friend John Mason, apprentices are not just teenagers and people in their early 20s. You can get apprentices at all ages, and we should celebrate this marvellous, flexible idea of apprenticeship and combine it with the principles of lifelong learning and changing careers and all of the things that a market system, a labour market system such as we have, should be facilitating and we should be supporting. The fact is that apprenticeship numbers have fluctuated sharply over the years, and sometimes without clear explanation. And this amendment, then, ensures transparency, forces difficult decisions into the open, rather than burying them in budgets or in guidance. Finally, Amendment 86 addresses volatility. It requires an annual labour market assessment to inform funding decisions, with employers and industry bodies properly consulted. Too often funding is allocated in silos. I mean, it is symptomatic of government, anywhere, that there is the emergence of silo working and silo thinking. And too often funding is allocated on the basis of silos. A disconnection occurs between other parts of government and, most importantly, what is actually happening on the ground. The Spice briefing and the Stage 1 scrutiny both highlighted concerns about whether the expanded Scottish Funding Council will have sufficient up-to-date labour market intelligence to guide decisions. This amendment directly responds to that concern. So putting these things together, as I conclude, these amendments are not radical. They are practical. They're grounded in evidence. They reflect how a modern labour market actually works. They really promote parity of esteem between academic and technical and professional training routes. They strengthen apprenticeships at every level. And especially I've laboured the point about undergraduates and the undergraduate or degree apprentices. They align education funding more closely with economic need, opportunity and growth. If this bill is to be about the workforce of the future and the economy of the future, then these amendments deserve Parliament's support.
Thank you, Mr Kerr. I call Paul O'Kane.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. And Scottish Labour welcome the intent behind many of the amendments in this group, because we've been clear that there are significant gaps in the existing apprenticeship and funding landscape. There is, of course, unmet needs both for young people in the skills system and businesses who need apprenticeships. And I think many of the reflections we've heard in this debate so far are really important in terms of not just those young people in the skills system, but the importance of the breadth and depth of apprenticeships across lifelong learning and across the opportunities that are provided for everyone. We are concerned, and have been concerned for some time, on the lack of data on colleges, meaning that there isn't a clear understanding of how many qualified apprenticeship applicants are being turned away, or how that relates to the needs that industry put forward and advocate for. What we do know, however, is that learning providers requested 34,000 starts in 24-25, for example, compared to actual starts of around 25,000. We know that there are also major skill shortages across the economy. Indeed, recent research by Scottish Engineering found that 20% of skills demand has been unmet due to real terms funding cuts to apprenticeships in Scotland. And I think it's why we have advocated, both in terms of the process around this bill and more widely, for alignment alignment of college funding with skills need, industrial strategy and employment outcomes, and to give colleges more independence and flexibility, particularly in terms of their finances, to unlock more co-investment from industry. It's also why we're supportive of reform to skills delivery and careers advice, to empower regional collaboration and leadership to ensure Scotland's skills delivery matches local business needs. So again, much of what is being spoken to in many of these amendments is why I think we must address unmet need in Scotland's apprenticeship system by boosting funding for apprenticeships so that every qualified applicant in priority sectors and occupations can be guaranteed a place. And so, whilst I do welcome the intent behind amendments in this group to increase the number and scope of apprenticeships and to deal with the lack of opportunities for so many of Scotland's young people, I do have some specific concerns around Amendments 43, 44 and 86 as to whether we should tie the hands of the Council into the future to permanently expand range, scope, number. And I think we perhaps might want to err on the side of ensuring flexibility in the system that allows to be responsive to the needs that will emerge and will develop as we go forward. Yes, of course I'll take an intervention.
Stephen Kane for giving way, but I'm sure he must realise that in saying what he's saying, he's in a way contradicting the point that Daniel Johnson made in his intervention on me, because unless we put things on the face of the bill that require the Funding Council to take care of certain things, to take care of certain matters, then that flexibility he's calling for might lead to an increase in the disparity of esteem which we currently have.
Paul O'Kane.
I think this returns to points that I've made earlier in today's debate around things that go onto the face of the bill. And I genuinely think there are matters of policy and there are matters of legislation. And I think very often in this Parliament we conflate some of those things by thinking that we can legislate our way into ensuring that policy is done well and crucially funded well. And I think actually we're in concert today about talking that ever upward expansion should be something we absolutely aspire to. I just don't know necessarily whether putting it on the face of the bill will actually deliver that in its totality and in reality, I suppose. Because I do worry there's something about creating hostages to fortune in a way, or additional layers of bureaucracy that might come in as a result of, for example, Amendment 86, calling for labour market assessment. You know, I would expect that actually to be part of any national funding strategy, which we've already kind of debated this afternoon. Mr Kerr is shaking his head. He does not have the same faith, perhaps, that I do on this. Not at all, he says. But I think that would be the expectation of who is sitting on those seats after the election. That should be a priority in terms of funding strategy and looking at that very clearly. And I think that perhaps brings me to my broad view of the themes within these amendments. There is much more to do, clearly, in terms of where we want to be on apprenticeships and on apprenticeship starts. I do not think that this bill at this stage in the Parliament is going to affect the change we need. I actually think it would be no surprise to members that I think a change of government is actually what would create the difference. And again, I think on a variety of pieces of legislation at this stage in the Parliament, we're not going to see the change that's required. But I'm sure we'll hear more of that as we proceed in the debate this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you. I call the Minister.
Presiding Officer, I thank Stephen Kerr for his engagement on the bill at stage 2 when we met this month. And I know that Mr Kerr is keen to see tangible benefits from this bill and to ensure that these are being delivered. I believe that his intentions are well motivated, and I know he is keen on accountability, outcomes and delivery, and I couldn't agree more. The question is how best to achieve these aims. I will be supporting his Amendment 50, which we work together on, when we come to it in a later group. That amendment will ensure that SFC is accountable and outcomes focused through enhanced reporting. This Group 9 of amendments, however, raise issues already debated at Stage 2. At Stage 2, Stephen Kerr argued that Scotland's education system often places disproportionate emphasis on university pathways and that it overlooks young people who are not academically inclined, he argued. And he's repeated some of those points in different words today. Mr Kerr stressed at Stage 2 that many young people fall through the cracks, so to speak, and that is something that we all need to consider on a constant basis and improve circumstances around. I think that the intention for his Amendment 39 has the same aim as his Stage 2 amendment, and that it is to provide equality of opportunity and ensure that unmet demand in the apprenticeship system is addressed, and indeed he's emphasised that in his comments today. I'm sympathetic to his intent here, but as I said to the committee at stage 2, it would be very difficult for any government to guarantee this. This is particularly true given that it depends on employers being able to provide sufficient jobs, apprenticeships and work-based learning options. It also assumes that an apprenticeship or work-based learning is most suitable for young people not already engaged. They might wish for and better be suited to other forms of education and training. Amendments 41, 42 and 43 are in the same vein as what was moved at stage 2. Amendment 41 seeks to target apprenticeships to specific groups, for example, those who are excluded from the labour market. Amendment 42 seeks to promote and support school-to-work transitions. And Amendment 43 seeks to ensure that steps are taken to expand both the number and range of graduate apprenticeships with a focus on sectors experiencing skill shortages. I agree with the underlying principles of these amendments. However, there are a number of reasons why I cannot support them. Amendments 41 and 42 introduce selective provision, and this targeted approach sits at odds with the SFC's broader duty to secure coherent provision across the system. There are important matters the SFC must have regard to when doing so under the 2005 Act, to which there are some significant amendments which we will come to later in Group 12. Embedding... Yeah, sure.
Stephen Kerr.
Presiding Officer, can I ask the Minister then, in relation to my Amendment 41, what underpinnings are there that the Council will consider unemployed persons, persons seeking to change careers, persons at risk of labour market exclusion? Because at the moment, that isn't in the purview of the Scottish Funding Council. How does the Minister believe that any of those groups of people will even be a consideration in the allocation of funding and of apprenticeships and places?
Minister. Well, I referred to considerations that the Scottish Funding Council must give regard to in terms of the Equality Act when we discussed those matters at an earlier juncture. And I spoke also in Group 1 about the strategy that we will now be putting into law should this bill pass the national funding strategy. So these considerations, and also in Group 12, moving on, embedding the provision made by Amendment 43 in primary legislation would limit flexibility, because over time we might find that a streamlined set of broader frameworks delivers better outcomes than expanding collection of highly specialised ones. For example, a single overarching health professions framework could hypothetically be more efficient than a series of individual frameworks for each discipline. And we do not want to tie future governments into a fixed arrangement, as Paul O'Kane emphasised. Amendment 44 brings back another proposal Stephen Kerr brought forward at stage 2. And again, the principle of year-on-year growth in the number of apprenticeships is laudable. But in practice, there are various factors that affect apprenticeship numbers sitting outside the control of government. This includes the population available for apprenticeships, which is dependent on the population of young people continually growing, and also others seeking to retrain and upskill. Yes.
Daniel Johnson.
I'm very grateful to the Minister for giving way. You just mentioned there about being contingent on the number of young people being available. I do actually think it's a really important point that actually we expand the apprenticeship and skill system so that it can deliver upskilling and reskilling, so actually apprenticeships can deliver for older people as well. I just wonder if you might sort of reflect on that point.
Minister. I think Daniel Johnson's point is well made, and I was seeking to emphasise that point when I specifically mentioned upskilling and reskilling in it. And I do think, particularly with the technological change that we are going to experience in the 21st century economy, that the need to upskill and reskill will only become more important, and we want to create opportunities for our people to do that where and when it's appropriate and right for them. Employers ultimately decide whether they can take on apprentices, and in more difficult economic conditions, businesses may be reluctant to hire, making it harder to deliver the desired number of apprenticeship starts required by this amendment. Amendment 86, so that was on Amendment 44. Amendment 86 requires the SFC to undertake a labour market assessment, and as I explained at stage 2, this is not a task which fits with the SFC's statutory role. The SFC is to secure coherent and high-quality provision of education and training. It is for the Scottish Government to assess labour market demands and skill shortages with other public bodies, including Skills Development Scotland. This is addressed through my amendment stage 10, which we discussed in Group 2, on a national funding strategy, which will ensure that funding decisions are based on the skills needs in Scotland. For the reasons I have set out, I cannot support any of the amendments in this group, and if Stephen Kerr presses them, I would urge other members to vote against them. Thanks.
Thank you. And I call on Stephen Kerr to wind up and press or withdraw Amendment 39.
Well, the Minister and I know each other quite well. He knows how important it is for me personally, but I hope for all of us, that when we pass legislation in this Parliament, that we're not doing it on a performative basis, but actually we are doing it with some change outcome in mind. And that change outcome should be a betterment, not a worsening as a result of legislation. And that is my motivation behind these amendments. I am concerned, and Daniel Johnson's intervention, I think, was timely, and it was also pertinent. I am concerned about what this bill effectively does, because it is basically a bureaucratic shift from Skills Development Scotland to the Scottish Funding Council. And I know that there'll be a pile of people with a pile of expertise and understanding that will go from one Scottish Government body to another. I get that. But I am concerned that in the very tight financial frameworks in which the Scottish Funding Council have been operating for some time, and we've had well-rehearsed arguments in this chamber about the state of Scotland's universities and their financial precariousness. We've had long debates about the Scottish colleges and about the 20% reduction in funding that's occurred just really within the period of the 6th session of this Parliament. And therefore, into that context, you put apprenticeships. And we know that there is unmet demand for apprentices. Thousands of apprenticeship roles are being unmet by the current system. There are roles out there, there are positions, there are opportunities for training, there are opportunities for people that would give them the leg up in life that they need. But they're not being taken because of the way we've chosen to organise things in respect to apprenticeships. And when Miles Briggs gets up to speak shortly about the apprenticeship levy funding, and I don't know if he plans to make comparisons with other countries, including England, including Germany and others, but there are things that we must learn from those countries about how they are making apprenticeships really matter for the people that get them. And it's not just young people. Again, Daniel Johnson's intervention on the Minister highlighted that point, and I completely agree with it. I really don't understand the reference, and perhaps afterwards the Minister will take me aside and tutor me on this, but, or he may write to me indeed, as he's just indicated. But I don't really understand what my Amendment 41 and my intervention on him has to do with the Equality Act. It does in relation to the issues that Pam Duncan-Glancy raised about disability. I get that, but I'm talking about the unemployed. I'm talking about people that are seeking a career change mid-working life. I'm talking about people that are in danger of labour market exclusion. I just worry, frankly, I genuinely do, that in the new setup, the considerations of these groups of people will be very low down the agenda. And when Paul O'Kane says to me, as he did across the chamber, that I have a low trust of government, guess what? Yes, I do. I really don't trust government. The whole point of us being a parliament is to hold that executive to account, to hold them to check, and frankly, putting things on the face of a bill. I understand the point he's making about the difference between policy and legislating and putting things into law, or trying to legislate for policy. I understand the point he's making about that, but not putting these basic things on the face of the bill, I'm afraid, is leaving the doors wide open for the maximum amount of flexibility that we don't necessarily want to see when there are certain aspects of this bill that we know are unsatisfactory. And so I will, Presiding Officer, I will be pressing my amendments in this group.
Thank you, Mr Kerr. The question is that Amendment 39 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. I call Shona Robertson for a point of order.
I couldn't connect. I would have voted no.
Thank you, Ms Robertson. We'll ensure that's recorded. I call Kenneth Gibson for a point of order.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I couldn't connect. I would have voted no. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Gibson. Likewise, we'll ensure your vote is recorded. The result of the vote on amendment number 39 in the name of Stephen Kerr is yes 46, no 73. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call amendment 84 in the name of Willie Rennie, already debated with amendment 30. Willie Rennie, to move or not move?
Not moved.
Thank you. The amendment is not moved. I call amendment 40 in the name of Brian Whittle, already debated with amendment 30. Brian Whittle, to move or not move?
Moved, please.
Thank you. The question is that amendment 40 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
No.
The Parliament is not agreed. There will be division and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. I call Shona Robertson for a point of order.
Still trying to connect. Would have voted no.
Thank you. We'll ensure that's recorded. The result of the vote on amendment number 40 in the name of Brian Whittle is yes 47, no 73. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call amendment 41 in the name of Stephen Kerr, already debated with amendment 39. Stephen Kerr, to move or not move?
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that amendment 41 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. I call Shona Robertson for a point of order.
Still working on my connection. I would have voted no.
Thank you, Ms Robertson. We'll ensure that's recorded. The result of the vote on amendment number 41 in the name of Stephen Kerr is yes 47, no 72. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call amendment 42 in the name of Stephen Kerr, already debated with amendment 39. Stephen Kerr to move or not move?
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that amendment 42 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. I call Marie Todd for a point of order.
Apologies, I'd have voted no.
Thank you, Ms Todd. We'll ensure that's recorded. The result of the vote on amendment number 42 in the name of Stephen Kerr is yes 46, no 73. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call amendment 43 in the name of Stephen Kerr, already debated with amendment 39. Stephen Kerr to move or not move?
Moved.
The question is that amendment 43 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. If the Parliament is not agreed, there will be a division and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. I call Davy Russell for a point of order.
Presiding officer, I couldn't log in there. Sorry, presiding officer, I couldn't log in there. I would have abstained.
Thank you, Mr Russell. We'll ensure that's recorded. The result of the vote on amendment number 43 in the name of Stephen Kerr is yes 28, no 72. There were 18 abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call amendment 44 in the name of Stephen Kerr, already debated with amendment 39. Stephen Kerr to move or not move?
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that amendment 44 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. I call Pam Gossel for a point of order.
Sir, I would have voted yes.
Thank you, Ms Gossel. We'll ensure that's recorded. The result of the vote on amendment number 44 in the name of Stephen Kerr is yes 28, no 90. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call amendment 85 in the name of Willie Rennie, already debated with amendment 30. Willie Rennie to move or not move? The amendment is not moved. I call amendment 86 in the name of Stephen Kerr, already debated with amendment 39. Stephen Kerr to move or not move?
Moved.
The question is that amendment 86 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. I call Neil Gray for a point of order.
I was unable to connect. It was a no.
Thank you. We'll ensure that is recorded, Mr Gray. And I call Sharon Dowie for a point of order.
I would have voted yes.
Thank you, Ms Dowie. We'll ensure that's recorded. The result of the vote on amendment number 86 in the name of Stephen Kerr is yes 28, no 72. There were 18 abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. That concludes this group, and before we move on to Group 10, we will have a 10-minute comfort break. So members should be back in the chamber for 17:40. Thank you. The meeting is suspended.